just let us know. I have the honor of introducing Patrick Haley. Patrick is an active member in the state of Maryland and the Frederick community. Mr. Haley currently serves and has served on many business, community, industry, and civic boards and councils throughout the state. Patrick is the secretary for On Mission IT and is a football coach for St. John's Catholic Prep. Patrick served as president of the board of directors for Interfaith Housing Alliance and chaired the business council for IHA. Patrick is the co-founder and former chairman of the Frederick Innovative Technology Center, Inc., who was kind enough to host the on-site session. Frederick County's first incubator. For 7 years, Patrick was a member of the Business Development Advisory Council for Frederick County and was elected as chairman in January of 2006 and served as chairman until the conclusion of his term. So I will let Patrick take over. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm going to be brief. My job here today is to welcome you. On Mission IT is a fairly new not-for-profit in Frederick County, and our whole job is to help not-for-profits get past some of their IT challenges. So we thought a great place to start was with cybersecurity, because it seems to be one of those dilemmas that people face where they have a lot of needs and they may not even know them. So we're going to have a great speaker today. And Darren is going to go through a great presentation on what you guys need to be looking for and how On Mission may be able to help you. And I have the honor of, first of all, thanking Lori for that great introduction. And I get to introduce John Pollock. He's the president of the On Mission IT board. I know John for about, 15, 16 years now. So we've been getting in trouble together for a long time. And John is over a 20-year IT professional. He started code in C++ when he was 14 in New York. He has his own business, Glade Creek Technologies, and it's a very boutique, Microsoft, Cisco-centric consulting firm doing mostly work in the federal space and some higher-end businesses. John also has 5 daughters, so what that means is he has no sleep, and none of them are of dating age yet, so he has all that to look forward to. Lives on a small family farm in Walkersville and enjoys a lot of 4-H activities and stuff like that. So without any further delay, I give you John Pollock, the president of On Mission IT.
John. I am just going to advance this slide one. No, it's absolutely fine. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Really excited by this. On Mission IT, we've been working in the background for a couple of years now, and this is really our first public sort of debut into the nonprofit world. I've spoken to a few of you. We've had a couple of, one-on-one meetings, and it's helped form where we are and where we're going to be going, and so that's been great. I had the vision for On Mission IT, a long, long time ago. I've worked with nonprofits since the 90s. And one of the things that seems to be a common thread for a lot of nonprofits is, there's sort of this pressure to put all of your resources into the programs. I mean, you have a mission, you want to fulfill that mission, you want to work, toward your programs. And technology is seen often as a general overhead. And so spending money and spending resources and spending time and talent on technology generally takes a back seat in nonprofits. And On Mission IT, really, our job is to help with that. So our tagline is helping you stay on mission. That's the whole point of On Mission IT is, focus on your programs, focus on your mission. We'll help with the technology. And that's where we're starting. So security risk assessment is a place where we could, really focus a very specific offering to get started. We've got a lot of great ideas for the future and a lot of expansion that we want to do. And I've had this vision, as I said, and it's been great, but a person alone with a vision doesn't really get anything accomplished. And we've had just some amazing people kind of coalesce around this vision. Our board is just a list of absolute rock stars who, without their shared participation, and their shaping of what we're doing, we've turned this thing into something that's going to be so much better than any one of us could have come up with, on our own. On our list of board members, we've got, Patrick Haley, who you just saw a second ago. We've got Ted Gregory. We've got Ellen Ross. We've got Hank Abramson. We've got Darren Clark, who you'll see shortly. So just wonderful people on that board. We've got, the Oshman Family Foundation. We've got Lori Perkins and Lee Adams, who have been, helping us, kind of shape where we want to go and what we want to do, and helping with their advice and with their, assistance setting this whole presentation up today. And I'm so thankful and so grateful for everything that everybody does to make this a shared reality. So that's all I have to say. Nobody had to break out the shepherd's crook and yank me off the stage. I'll keep it short, but without further ado, I want to introduce Darren Clark. I don't think he needs an introduction. I think everybody probably knows who Darren Clark is. He's the owner of Clark Computer Services. He's very much involved in the Frederick nonprofit community. He provides IT services already for many of you in this presentation and in this room. So without further ado, Darren Clark. Cool.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Pat, and thank you to the Oshman Family Foundation for hosting this security training session today. I want to start by saying that when I think about IT security, I don't necessarily think about things like firewalls and antivirus. I really start with what it is that you're trying to protect, and that's is information. So, with the rise of ransomware, everybody has become concerned with, their networks becoming breached. And the first step is understanding what information that you need to protect. And by conducting what we call a cybersecurity risk assessment, that's the starting point in identifying where you're vulnerable. And it's not necessarily just focusing on things like firewalls and antivirus. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Darren Clark. Not only am I on the board for On Mission IT, but I own a local IT support company called Clark Computer Services. We started in 2003, and now we support a little bit over 500 local businesses here in the Frederick community. And we also support another 800 homes. Many of the businesses that we support are nonprofits, and specifically small nonprofits. Clark Computer Services, we don't go after large businesses. We simply focus on small businesses. And this kind of makes me feel that I have a real good understanding of the challenges that everybody here faces when they're trying to protect their information or they're trying to stay ahead of cyber criminals. So it's become a greater concern of our clients, protecting information. Like I said, there's, I think everybody in this room is aware of ransomware. I mean, you can't go a day without someone in the news being affected by it, where a cyber criminal hacks into your network, encrypts all of your data, and then holds that data for ransom, asking you for money. And not only is it the money that, that you have to pay the people holding your information ransom, but also, you might have fees for legal fees and negative exposure with your clients. So you simply need to ask yourself, what would you do if you were experiencing ransomware, to understand the importance of identifying all the ways that a hacker can hack into your network. I went backwards, sorry about that. I'm new to technology, but so cybersecurity risk assessments, and I might just say risk assessments for short, is a process that you should do on a yearly basis. And it really involves 4 major steps. There's the assessment phase where, a qualified company like On Mission IT conducts both an inventory and an interview session with key players in your organization to identify, which is the next phase, all of the areas where you are weak on security or where you're not in compliance with regulations that you might have to follow. And after you identify those areas of weakness, then you want to come up with your remediation plans, or how you're going to fix those weaknesses. And not only do you come up with a remediation plan, but then you plan those remediations out and take steps to correct your deficiencies. And after you do the remediation, then you want to step back and you want to review what you've done to make sure that you've covered all your bases. And like I said earlier, this is not something that you just do on a, one time. You should think of this as an ongoing process, and most regulations actually require you to do it yearly. Cool. So I want to, most people ask, you might ask yourself, well, why should my organization do a risk assessment, where to identify, where you're weak on your cybersecurity. And, a scary statistic that I've got up on the screen is that 50% of all nonprofits have already experienced a ransomware attack. So most likely half of you guys that are attending this security training session have already experienced ransomware at some level, and most likely you're going to experience at some level in the future. So it's not only, if it's going to happen to you, it's also when it's going to happen to you. And it's a common misbelief that cyber criminals aren't going to target the small business or the small nonprofit, but that's simply not the case. Almost half of all cyber attacks affect small organizations. So it's something that I think everybody that's attending this training session should be very concerned about. So over the last year, due to COVID and having a workforce that's working remotely or from home, we've seen a big increase on cyber attacks. So not only with malware, but also ransomware. And if you look at the screen, you can see that, it's not just a doubling, but sometimes a quadrupling, the amount of attacks that we're experiencing. And mainly this is because we have a workforce that's working from home, and that, where they're behind networks that are not as secure as maybe your business's network. They have, low-end firewalls protecting their network. Maybe they just have their internet service provider's modem, which isn't necessarily, really good defense against hackers hacking into the network. They also may not have antivirus installed on their computers. It's common for most home computers to be shared by family members. So you're introducing kids to computers that are, being used for the work environment. So, one of the common things that kids like to do is download free software and free music. And those, those are fraught with viruses, and it's something that, could lead to not only infecting their computer, but since they're connecting to your office through either a VPN or through a remote session, they could also bring those viruses or hackers into your network. So not only bring it into your network, but many of you guys have moved to the cloud. So you have cloud portals, whether it's Office 365 or products like Blackbaud. And so the cyber criminals, if they access your employees' home computers and they're accessing those portals, then the cyber criminal has access to that as well. So, it's becoming a big concern, and COVID really has done nothing but increase those concerns. And the big kicker is that the cost of, remediating a successful breach on your network could cost your organization several $1 million. And, statistically, it's been shown that over the course of 5 years, the majority of businesses that have been hit with things like ransomware are going to go out of business. So it's something that, not to scare everybody, but it's something that, each manager or executive director should pay particular attention to. And I encourage everyone to take steps. And the starting point for that is doing a risk assessment to identify the weaknesses in your network. So I think most organizations will ask themselves, well, are cyber criminals really targeting, a small organization like myself or like the organization that I run? And that might be something that's true in years past, but lately, cyber criminals who are opportunistic in nature, they've targeted small businesses and small nonprofits, not only because you guys have information that's valuable in the dark web, you might have financial information or credit card information, but you also have donor information that cyber criminals then can use to create fake campaigns to commit fraud, because they know that you have an audience that is likely to contribute or to donate money. So they'll set up fake campaigns, contacting your clients, asking for donations, and committing fraud against them. They also know that most small organizations, don't have the same security levels that a large organization might have. And so it's easier for them to hack into your network. So, the old school of thought where, I'm too small, I'm not an attractive target to a cyber criminal, that's simply not true. And on top of that, most of these attacks start with automated bots, that are just, scouring the internet. They're programs that are just going after, scanning one IP address after another, looking for weaknesses in your defenses. And once they find that weakness, whether you're a large business or a small business, they're going to target you. And so it's something that, everybody, big or small, is impacted by. And so it's something that we all need to take seriously and be concerned about. So I wanted to give an example of a semi-recent data breach that I think maybe most people attending this are already familiar with, and that's Blackbaud's data breach. Last year, they were hit by ransomware, and it affected 13 million users. Now, Blackbaud is not a nonprofit; they're a commercial enterprise, and they also aren't a small business but what they do have is they have a cloud-based product that many small businesses or small nonprofits use to store financial information and donor information. So what we saw at Clark Computer Services when ransomware affected Blackbaud is we had clients that affected them too. And it cost them, money, not only in, things like legal fees, because they had to contact lawyers to find out what they should do because their customers are affected, but they also had to send out, breach notices to their customers, informing them that they were part of this breach. And that just, not only was it something that cost them time and money to do, but it also gave them negative exposure. There was a time that, when I started in 2003 and I would go on sales calls, I would tell people that as long as I have, strong backups, that as long as I know that I'm backing up your data every night, I can recover you from anything that happens to you. But today, that's not my primary concern. Today, I'm also concerned with cybersecurity because we've seen customers where they've been affected by ransomware, but it's not an immediate thing. The hackers, set themselves up on computers on their networks and took their time. They waited months where they did their due diligence. Not only did they, encrypt all of their data, but they took the time to delete all their backup sets so that the customers had no option but to either pay the ransomware or just start all over with the data. Ransomware, again, affects all of us, big or small. And even if you are using a portal by a large corporation that pours money into cybersecurity, it still doesn't make it bulletproof. And so one of the things that a risk assessment provides you is to show that if a breach does occur to your organization, that you're taking all the necessary steps to protect that information, and that reduces your legal liability. Cool. So I wanted to talk about three challenges that most nonprofits face, and it's mindset, staffing, and denial. So mindset, similar to a small business, and I see this all the time, it's becoming less so as the threats that we face are becoming scarier, but most small business has a hard time setting aside money for IT security because they don't see the direct impact on profits. And similar to that, a nonprofit has a hard time, dedicating funding to IT security because it doesn't directly impact the mission. But it's something that I call a soft impact, even though you can't put your finger on it. By not taking the appropriate security steps, you could actually have a negative impact on your organization when a breach actually occurs to your organization. The next challenge that most nonprofits face is staffing. Nonprofits usually aren't flush with money, so they don't have, funds that they can dedicate to an IT professional. I think most, nonprofits outsource their IT. They use companies like On Mission IT or Clark Computer Services to provide IT support, but still those funds are limited. And so they can't afford to have an IT staff member that has the experience and knowledge to secure their environment. They also don't have the funding to hire someone in HR that has all the knowledge necessary to put things like policies and procedures in place that helps you protect your environment. So that's one more challenge. And the last challenge is something I already went over. Now I see this as decreasing as well. But that's denial. A lot of small businesses or small nonprofits, they simply don't believe that they are a target for cyber criminals because they ask themselves, what, I don't have enough money or I don't have information that's attractive to a cyber criminal. And same reasons that I explained earlier, that's simply not the case. In fact, a cyber criminal is more attracted to a small business or a small nonprofit simply because they know that it's easier for them to penetrate your defenses. And once they do, that you do have valuable information that they can use. So I want to quickly just touch on, one set of information that almost everyone in this room or that's attending this Zoom meeting most likely has, and that's personal identifiable information. And this is information that can be used to identify individuals, that can be used to commit fraud. And some examples of that would be social security numbers, names, addresses, email address. All of us most likely have it. We have human resource records that we have to protect by regulation. We have personal donor information that we have to protect. And these are things that not only should you protect, but there are regulations out there that say you have to protect that. I'm not sure why I keep going backwards. All right, cool. So there's a lot of standards out or regulations out there that govern protected information. There's HIPAA. I think everybody's familiar with that. That's regulations that govern the healthcare industry. And not only if you're in the healthcare industry, do you have to comply with HIPAA, but if you are an organization that's part of the supply chain, Clark Computer Services would be a good example of that. We have about 100 small medical practices that we provide IT support. So we're in their supply chain. But if you're in the healthcare industry or if you're in their supply chain, then you have to comply with HIPAA. And it's not a should you comply, it's that you have to comply. There's also CGIS, which governs anybody that's in the law enforcement field. And there's PCI compliance, which anyone that accepts credit cards has to comply with PCI. And there's several other federal regulations out there that you may or may not have to comply with. And not only are there federal regulations, but there are regulations at the state level that govern protected information. But the one thing that all of these regulations have in common is that they all can be traced back to NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they have some common core components that you see across the board. And I've listed a few of them right here on this slide. So there are one of the common requirements are cyber safeguards. Everyone has to have technical controls in place like firewalls, antivirus, applying security updates. And not only do you have to have those technical controls that we typically associate with security, but you also have to have policies and procedures in place that govern how you operate, ensuring that you're doing so in a manner that protects information. Another common requirement is training. A good example of that is a security awareness training. Every regulation that I know out there requires you at some level to provide security awareness training to your employees. A lot of them require you to do it yearly. But at Clark Computer Services, we decided a long time ago not to do it at a yearly level, but to do it at a weekly level. So we hold weekly staff meetings, and at each staff meeting, we have a security component or security awareness training component to it, where we talk about things like phishing email attempts. So I think everybody's aware of phishing emails. That's where an email message goes out. It looks like it's coming from your Office 365 or your Google Apps account or Dropbox or some other kind of cloud provider telling you that you have something wrong with your account, asking you to click on a link. And when you do that, a web page comes up asking you to enter in your username and password. When in fact, because they're phishing for you, that's a fake website. And when you enter your username and password in, they have that. And so that's something that you should train your employees on. And we do it, at staff meetings, things like that, where we will go over what does a phishing email look like, and what you should do when you see one, and actually, make sure that you don't click on that link and going to the web page and enter using a password. And we also talk about if you do click on that link and you do enter your username and password, what should you do after that once you realize that you made a mistake? That's a requirement that all of these regulations have in common. We're talking today about risk assessments. That's another common requirement across all regulations. They want you to it's not something that you should do, but it's something that you should do at the very beginning of the process. It's something that is the beginning point where you step back, you evaluate your infrastructure, and you come up with every area where you're not in compliance with those regulations. And the regulations are there to help you secure information. So the next common requirement are third-party agreements. And this is something that when we go out and do risk assessments, it's almost always people aren't doing this. So third-party agreements are contracts that you put in place between your organization and any vendors that you use that might in the course of them doing work where they would come across protected information. So if you have, I'm going to use an IT support company as an example again, because when you ask us to do work, we're doing work on your computers or on your servers, and it's common for us to see information. And that information might not just be regular business information, but it also might be information that you guys are required to protect. So what your organization wants to do is put a third-party agreement in place between yourself and that vendor that actually spells out to them that they also have to follow the same requirements that you do. And this is not another thing that you should do. It's a must in all of the regulations. The last thing that's a common requirement across the board is data breach notification. So when your organization experiences a breach or a hacker hacks into your network and actually gets a hold of protected information, you're required by law to notify everyone that's affected by that breach, whether it's human resource records and it's your employees, or it's your donors that, that a cyber criminal has their personal information. By law, you have to notify them, giving them the opportunity to take measures to protect themselves. And in Maryland, I think in 2008, not only was a law passed that you have to notify your customers of the breach, but you also have to report the breach to the Attorney General, and they put that your company name on a list, with a date that your company was breached. So once again, doing a security risk assessment, it's not going to make your organization bulletproof, but it will give you everything where you're not in compliance with those regulations, allowing you to take steps to fix those issues. So I want to now start talking about a risk assessment, and that's what the next 3 slides are about, or the next 4. So like I said, a risk assessment has 3 main components. There's the inventory, where we go out and we inventory not only all of your hardware, but there's other things, and I'm going to get to that in the next slide, about your organization. We then do an interview with key stakeholders, asking a long series of questions, trying to understand where your weaknesses are. And then we take the results from the inventory and the interview, and we identify all of your risks, score them as far as what risks are more important than others as far as remediate them, and we produce a risk assessment report. So let me just talk about, I keep going backwards. I'm a newbie at PowerPoint, so I apologize. All right, so the inventory. I think most people, when they think of an inventory, they're thinking about physical devices like, computers, routers, switches, servers. But not only do we take an inventory of all of your hardware, but we inventory other items like software, roles, protected information, and vendors. So with hardware, when we do a hardware inventory, we're not just looking to capture information like the serial number of the device or the manufacturer and model. We're also asking security questions about every device that we come across. So some of those questions would be like, does this device have a complex password? Is there a timeout set on the device so when you walk away from it, it times out, keeping an unauthorized individual from jumping on your computer or server and accessing data? We want to know if that device, if it's a computer or server, does it have antivirus installed? And we also want to know, are security updates being applied to that? And there are several other security-minded questions that we ask when we're doing these interviews. We also want to create an inventory of all of the business software that your organization uses. And the reason that we want to do that is because we want to identify every piece of software, whether it's software installed locally on your computer, or if it's software that's out on the cloud that holds protected information. Because with that knowledge, we then can determine are all the security controls in place on that software to protect from unauthorized access from employees or hackers. We want to know all of the roles that are involved with protected information. We also want to have an inventory of all of the information that you are expected to protect. So that could be credit card information, donor information. If you're in the healthcare industry, it could be medical records. Not only, what information that you're expected to protect, but where's that information stored? Is it stored on a file share somewhere, and are all the appropriate permissions in place? Or is it stored out in the cloud, on some kind of infrastructure like Blackbaud? And then we want to do an inventory of all the vendors that you use so that we can identify which vendors, come across protected information when they're doing work for you.
Can I ask a question?
Yep,
You mentioned that your computer should be set up so that they'll log off or time.
timeout, lock. Mhm.
And it got me thinking about, of course, you would want to have third-party agreements with people that you know are coming in and working directly in your offices, but it got me thinking about like after hours cleaning crew or something like that. Would you recommend having agreements even with organizations? Like
Absolutely, and you should, because, so Lori asked, I'm gonna just kind of break it down to the root of her question is, should you have business associated or third-party agreements in place with vendors like your cleaning company that comes in at night and cleans your office? And the answer to that's absolutely. Because when they're cleaning offices, they could come across passwords on your, you shouldn't be holding passwords on your desk. That's a bad example. Many people do, but they could come across protected information in the course of doing work, whether that's in the form of paper or someone left the computer unlocked. So you definitely want to have a third-party agreement in place with a company like that. And if you're not sure if you should have a third-party agreement in place, I say put one in place regardless.
Funny story I'll just throw out there, but I've actually had a situation where cleaning crews stole a server and the backup drive connected to it.
Yeah, so for the,
And it made a lot of sense to me.
yeah, could everybody hear that? Yeah. So I recommend, be cautious, put those agreements in place, because that takes some of the liability off of your shoulders if that organization becomes breached. And because they're breached, you're breached. Or if one of their employees, like John pointed out, steals a server or a computer. That's the first time I've heard that, but it doesn't surprise me. So anyways, you want an inventory of all your vendors, and those are good reasons why. So after we conduct an inventory, the next step is to do interviews. And that's usually with individuals like your human resource department to understand things about policies and procedures, and maybe even like an office manager or some other individual in your organization. It's not necessarily with your IT staff or people that are aware of technology, although they would be welcome in the interview as well. And the interview doesn't necessarily focus down in the nitty gritty on technical questions. It more focuses on things like policies and procedures. We want to know that you have the necessary policies in place that you're required to by these regulations. For example, we'll want to know, do you have a computer usage policy in place? And have you trained your employees on that computer usage policy so they're aware of what they're allowed to do with the computers and devices that you give to them, and more importantly, what they're not allowed to do. We also want to know, have you defined roles and responsibilities in your organization? And are you assigning access rights to protected information at a minimum level needed for that role to do their job? For example, you don't want to give everybody in your organization administrator rights. Some employees or roles simply need view-only access, while others need edit and modify permissions. And then a few people might need administrative permissions, where not only can they access the data, but they can also create things like user accounts. The next set of questions that we're going to ask during the interview are about your technical processes. And a good example of that is, do you have IT maintenance in place? And that's extremely important, because a lot of hackers can get onto your network because there are vulnerabilities in devices like your firewall or your wireless access points. When vulnerabilities are discovered in a firewall or an access point or any other kind of device like a computer, the manufacturer puts out security updates so that you can download and install that security update, patching that vulnerability. So we're going to want to know, do you have IT maintenance in place where you're doing that process, and are you doing it on a monthly basis, ensuring that you're patching those vulnerabilities as soon as the vendor comes out with a patch. And that's, I can't stress enough how important that is. When I'm involved with sales at Clark Computer Services, and 9 times out of 10, when I go and talk to a new client, they don't have any maintenance in place. Their servers, workstations, firewalls, access points may not have been updated for years. So they have years worth of vulnerability that a hacker can take advantage of to enter onto the network. They don't have to physically be present in your facility to take advantage of those vulnerabilities. If it's a wireless system, they can sit outside in the parking lot, hack into the network in minutes, and from there they can gain access to the information you're expected to protect. Last, during the interview process, we're going to want to also know, do you have emergency strategies in place? A good example of that is, do you have an incident response plan? So that's a plan that you put in place, and you train your employees on it, where you define all the roles that are responsible if a successful breach occurs, and what you're supposed to do when that breach occurs. And this is another thing that's been shown, that organizations that have an incident response plan in place and they've trained their employees on that plan, if they get breached, they greatly reduce their liability and their exposure to that breach, because when you act fast on a breach and you know what to do, you can limit what that cyber criminal does on your network. So that's another important thing to have in place. So after we conduct the inventory and the interview, then whether it's On Mission IT or Clark Computer Services, we then step back, we evaluate the results from both the inventory and the interview, and we identify all the areas where you're not in compliance with the regulations that you have to follow, or where your risks are in having a hacker breach into your network. And so this is at an executive level. It's not written in technical jargon. And it's meant for executives to be able to read, use to plan and budget for these fixes. So here I just kind of put 2 items that you would find on the matrix that we provide to you on a risk report. They're both easy examples to talk to. One is insufficient computer maintenance. We just spoke about that and the importance of having maintenance. If we see that your organization isn't performing updates on computers or networking devices, we're going to recommend that you implement that program, and we're going to give you steps on what you should do and how often you should do that. Our recommendation is to do updates at least every 30 days. So whether it's a workstation, a server, a networking device, you want to check to see if updates are available, and you want to apply those updates within a 30-day period. The next item I put on this report is insecure logon procedure. That really comes down to organizations that are just using a username and password to log onto their network or log onto their cloud accounts or any other kind of product that has protected information. So what we recommend, instead of using just a single username and password, is that all organizations move to 2-factor authentication. So I think most people are aware of what 2-factor authentication is. A good example of that is your banking portals. Most of you, if you do any kind of online banking, when you log into your bank account, not only do you have to supply a username and password, but you're also sent a code, most likely to your cell phone, sometimes to your email account, where that you have to have that code, enter the code into the portal before you'll be allowed access. And this third piece of information has been shown, especially in phishing attempts, to reduce your chances of being breached by 99%. So it's something that we recommend all organizations move to, not just for logging onto your network, whether it's through a VPN connection or remote access, but also every cloud account that you own, you should implement 2-factor authentication. And if that provider doesn't provide two-factor authentication, you should seriously think about moving away from them to another company that does. So with that, that's the end of my presentation on risk assessments, and I'm going to open it up to questions. Is that correct? Or are we taking a break?
Yeah, let's take a short break.
So we're going to take maybe a 5-minute break.
Make a 5-minute
Everybody
break.
stretch their legs, use the restroom, or whatever they want to do.
Thanks, Darren.
Yeah.
My audio. Fantastic. Okay. So we're gonna get it back going again. I'm just gonna say a couple more words and we'll do some question and answers. If you have any questions that you'd like us to address, feel free to type them into the chat there. Lori's watching the chat. She'll let us know what the questions are. We'll repeat them so everybody knows what's being asked. And if there's a question that you would like to ask, but maybe isn't one that you feel is maybe it's a little embarrassing or who knows what, we can absolutely address that after the session, offline sometime on a one-on-one meeting or whatever. But I want to make sure that everybody feels like they're getting, their specific concerns addressed as far as security is concerned. One of the things that I maybe should have made a little bit more clear at the beginning of this presentation, On Mission IT is a nonprofit. We're not here to like sell you guys something. That wasn't the point of anything that we're doing here. We're volunteers and we're trying to provide IT services that are of little or no cost. That said, the next steps to get moving, we're offering the security risk assessment. Darren and Clark Computer Services is actually offering volunteer talent from his pool of talent to perform some of these risk assessments for the nonprofit community. And we're working out a deal where we can rope in other, volunteers, other IT professionals that we can qualify and vet and kind of keep this thing going so that we have a pool of talent that we can provide services, starting off with the security risk assessment, but also moving into other IT services. To that end, also, if you serve the Frederick area, the Osherman Family Foundation has been nice enough to offer some financial assistance to help with some of these things, specifically the security risk assessment. Definitely reach out to Lori Perkins for questions about that. I'll
just say I've got some business cards up there. I think most of you have my email address, but just to make sure.
Yeah, she's got business cards here and an email address. Also, I think we have everybody's email address that attended both online and in person. If we don't, definitely make sure that we do. You can send that to Lori. We'll follow up with an email to everybody. We're going to give everybody a link to the recording of this presentation. We're going to give everybody a sample security risk assessment so you understand after you go through the risk assessment, what you're going to get out of it, what that report should look like, a sample of that. And we're also going to send the slide deck as well, so you can kind of go back and see the things that Darren went through, just as a refresher. If you want to show a colleague, like, oh, wow, I that's a great presentation, and you kind of look through that slide deck and kind of maybe jog your brain about some of the cool things that you heard today. So I was going to start it off with a question that, I get a lot, and maybe turn it over to Darren. Maybe you can go through some of the war stories, so to speak, of things that we've seen, in the IT community. But, over the years, I've had an opportunity to sort of get involved in some recovery efforts after security intrusions. So not talking about the maybe it could happen and what happens if and what should we, but wow, this just happened. How did this happen? What are we going to do about it? And one of the things that's kind of interesting, I think in the mainstream media, they tell a great story that's entertaining about sort of a solo hacker that's like got his hoodie on and he's just enormously talented and he just blasts through these like huge corporations, like multi-million-dollar defense systems. And I mean, that's a great story, but the majority of attacks don't happen like that at all. That's not how things happen. The majority of attacks are just a numbers game. Darren talked about why would a nonprofit be targeted. A lot of the initial stages of an attack, they don't know who you are. You're just an IP address on the internet. They have no idea. If you look at firewall logs, you'll see a ton of just automated probing against your defenses. And one of the things, again, Darren alluded to is patching, right? So the funny thing is, as soon as Microsoft or Cisco or somebody releases a patch, every hacker on the planet is reverse engineering that patch to figure out what was just fixed. And if they can create an attack that targets what that patch fixes and launch that attack before everybody gets that patch installed, well, then they can get, it's like their work's done for them. So they're not necessarily targeting you. They're just going to spread and say, hey, we're going to just hit these million IP addresses in the US because the US guys have lots of money and we're just going to hit them. They don't know if you're a nonprofit when the attack starts. And in the attacks that I've actually had to go back and figure out what happened and how did this happen, a lot of times what we'll see is we'll see a very automated thing come through and they'll get a positive return. And what ends up happening with that is these are actually, this is big business. These are large corporations. These aren't like guys in a hoodie and a single dude. These are like big businesses. These are dudes that have a 9-to-5 shift that show up and sit in a cube farm and hate their job, but it pays the bills and they have to just go through this database of automated attacks that like, oh, these hit. They're like, okay, level 1 dude goes, was this really an attack? Is it still open? Can we actually do something to exploit this? And they just ping on it a little bit. And again, doesn't normally trigger a log. You wouldn't know it. Us sitting here in this thing, there's attacks like this. They're happening right now to everybody. We have no idea that they're happening because they're so low profile. They're not doing anything. They're not actually a breach yet, but they're a breach in progress. They're trying to get in there, right? And then if the level 1 guy gets through the door a little bit, he's this might be real. That goes back in the database for the level 2 guy to go take a look at it, right? I mean, it's just like any other big business. They have a process, they go through it. And so the data breaches that we've actually seen these automated attacks that kind of ping, 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 ping. When they finally found something good, you can actually see a dude typing on the keyboard. It's not fast. It's a guy that's intelligently looking at the network. He's looking at stuff. They're figuring out what they found here. And again, very low level. In one particular instance, they were actually able to recover a username and a password of somebody who had a lot of access to a lot of things. They used a computer that they had already had access to in the United States. They used their VPN client with that person's username and password, logged in as them from the United States. Again, no alarms are going off. Nobody's going to see somebody logging in from, Rockville as like, oh, this is awful. They're using the right credentials. Who cares? They actually hacked into a network, got no malware installed. They actually just changed some DLL files that were really innocuous. They logged in, stayed logged in, had access to everything on the network for 2 years. They didn't make noise. They didn't install malware. There weren't pop-ups. They weren't like, the computers were going crazy. They were just very quiet about it. And they were looking for specific things. They were looking for an opportunity to wreak some havoc at the right time in the right ways. And these are the types of things that, could be going on and you wouldn't know about it. And that's the whole like race game. Like, let's get things patched, let's stop things at that sort of automated level. Because we don't want you to end up in the database. We don't want that IP to come back as, oh, hey, there's a vulnerable Cisco firewall right here, like this. We don't want them to have to keep coming back. We don't want the intelligent guys to think that there's something that they want to attach to. We want to stop it before it gets to that. And this risk assessment can kind of identify some of these things that we can say, oh, if we just tweak this a little bit right here, we're going to pull you off a lot of the targeted lists because then you won't be so attractive to these people anymore. So just wanted to give that kind of experience and some of the things that I've seen out in the field. It's a question that I get a lot of sort of this, what does a hacker really look like? What does a hacker act like? And it is very different from the media, what the majority of these hackers do. Just like I say, just going through the process. They just got their, I got 70 IPs I got to check today. I can't wait to get up with my kids. Whatever. Really, it's a lot like that.
It is.
So we do have some questions rolling in.
Great.
The first one is there a recommended way for organizations to store user passwords and shared passwords for cloud accounts?
Yes, and yes. So I've got my director of compliance here who actually has more knowledge than I do. And he was shaking his head because this is something that, we talk about a lot. Password managers. Am I right? Yeah. So he said I'm right. So we recommend that you move away from storing usernames and passwords in things like folders or files, Excel spreadsheets, stickies under your keyboard, or wherever you're storing them, and that you move towards a secured password manager. Not only can you get a password manager, but you can get ones that are meant for teams. We use at Clark Computer Services a product called LastPass, where, if we need to, we can share passwords securely amongst each other. And if I share it to someone and they no longer need access to that password, I can unshare it so that it's not sitting in their account. Not only does that password manager allow you, not only is it encrypted, it uses two-factor authentication so that someone can't simply hack into the password manager, but also it will recommend passwords for you, and it'll automatically fill those passwords in. So now you can get away from the thought of, man, I got to remember all these different passwords for all these different sites that I have. You can have complex passwords that are hard to remember for every account, and each of those passwords can be unique. and that you can automatically fill in the username and password when you go to your website, or you can, there's functions that allow you to paste them into things like logging into your network or wherever you go. And most of them have smart apps, so you can put that password manager on your phone. So if you're logging into a product from your phone, or if you're out and about and you need that password, you always have it with you, and it's also secure. All right.
So if you're using something like LastPass, you would have a password to log into that?
Yeah,
system?
so I got a question. I don't know if everybody can hear the questions that are being asked here, but he asked, so would you have a password for a password manager? And absolutely, not only would you have a password for it, but you'd have two-factor authentication, because these are portals as well. You wouldn't want someone to do a brute force password attempt on your password manager and then have access to all your passwords. Yeah, that was a good question.
Next question. Can you give an example of a security solution that would allow protected backup of PII with little risk from cyber attackers? Maybe an air-gapped off-site server.
Well, I think you want to, we have, so I'm going to try to repeat that. So I don't know if everybody could hear. Are you unmuted? No.
I am not.
Okay, so I was asked for a recommendation on a secured backup solution. And they also mentioned air gapping, which means not having that backup online. So we recommend having multiple backups. Not only, I've been a big fan of having multiple backups for a long time, because I see backups fail even before I was concerned with cyber criminals hacking into your backup system and deleting your backup sets. So what we usually recommend is step one is we'll use a secured backup product, and we can send out some recommendations to people here. We're actually evaluating new products ourselves. We've outgrown our current backup vendor. But I will say that when you look for these cloud-based backups, not only do you want to make sure that they are in compliance with any kind of security regulations that you have to follow, but you also, since they're cloud-based, you want to make sure that that backup vendor has two-factor authentication available, so that someone can't brute force hack into your backups. Air gapping, or having offline backups in place, absolutely, I recommend that. So what we do is we'll have multiple backups in place. We'll have a cloud-based backup going to somewhere off-site, encrypted, so that it's encrypted from your network, so that even the backup vendor can't access the data. Making sure that has two-factor authentication, but we'll also have local backups. An easy way for people to understand that is, most organizations, you go in there and you see the USB drives plugged into servers where they're doing a backup onto the USB drive. But we'll do encrypted backups on it. Preferably you use a USB drive that's encrypted, that requires a security key to actually access the drive. And then we'll rotate those off of the server so that you always have a version of your backup that's not connected to the network. So even if those backups are compromised, you always have another set. So that usually involves two secured backup USB drives attached to the server or workstation, along with the cloud backup. Hopefully I answered that question. Good. Good. You can't back up enough. And one thing, I don't think it's not part of that question, but I am going to point it out because I get this a lot. And this just happened last week at our shop. I had an individual come in that all of their work, they did video production, and they were in the middle of a project. And she says, I back up I put all of my work on my backup drive. So what she was doing was it was a one-person office, and she was storing all of her information on the USB drive, thinking that that was a backup. So she wasn't storing it on her local computer. She was storing it directly to her backup drive. And that's more common than you might think. That drive had failed. And it cost her over $3,000 to send it out to a special company that has the equipment to tear apart the hard drive and read the platters from a dust-free environment. So make sure you always have at least 2, prefer your data in 3 places. Is that good?
Question for you. The assessment, how intrusive is it? And if you have an outside IT company already, would they know that we're doing it?
Well, so it's non-intrusive. So, I think most people think that you need to do you're talking about a penetration testing.
Well, I'm just curious. I mean,
That's intrusive. Okay, yeah.
I don't, we have a help desk company, basically, is what they are.
Yeah.
They say they do all this stuff. I have no idea.
I hear that all
I
the
would
time.
love to know
I hear a lot all the
that
time.
we're on board with a lot of the
Yeah.
recommendations you're making and a lot of
Yeah.
things are happening.
The only part
I
that,
can tell you right now, sorry to interrupt, but I can tell you
Yeah,
right now, most of our users don't log out of their systems.
yeah. You
Because
want
they
to
don't know their passwords.
right? Yes. Yeah. Right. Hear that all
When we
the
did
time.
the 2-factor authentication, man, that was like going to the dentist for a root canal.
Yeah, I get it. That's why you have an experienced company guiding you through that. It becomes a lot easier,
Yeah.
but it's non-intrusive. But it gets if we need to log into things like your firewall or your server to verify that updates are being applied. It's non-intrusive as long as you have the administrator credentials that are needed for us to do that. So they wouldn't know that we're doing it necessarily, unless they're doing keystroke logging, which is, I've never seen that happen by an IT company. But usually what we do involves your staff, not your third-party IT company. But I hear that all the time. It's common for me when I go into a sales call for someone saying, I'm paying our IT support company, but I'm not sure what they do for us. And I'm not sure if they're even doing what they say they're doing for us. So it doesn't hurt to get it checked.
Yeah.
Because even if you say that you're hiring, you have a third-party company that's supposed to be doing that, you still bear the burden of, if you are breached. So, no.
Yeah, and there's a couple of ways, like I can do a blind, I've done it myself, like do a blind assessment and then a knowledge assessment. So a blind assessment, I go on my laptop, I don't know anything about your network. I see what I can see, I penetrate what I can penetrate, I give you reports. So without knowing anything about your network, this is what I have. Then I get one where I have all the information. So I already know the names of the servers, I know what operating systems are on, and then I go and I penetrate it that way, telling you what I can get you with some knowledge of the network.
Yeah. So
it's handy in like a PCI type compliance audit. I've done it where I've walked in cold, asked for a tour of the building, got to the IT manager, oh, show me your server room. They walk me in, I literally pull out my phone, start recording the server room, and they let me do it.
Yeah.
Like, how do you do it? Yeah, I mean, I've done it.
So I want to address one more thing I was thinking about when I asked you, you have to have your administrative credentials. I can't tell you how many businesses that I've walked into that don't have their own usernames and password to their servers, their firewalls, or any of their other administrative accounts. So I always recommend the first thing that you should do is, if you don't have those credentials, you own those, not your IT support company. It's not, they don't own those accounts. You own those accounts, and that you communicate with them that you're wanting to start having documentation on your end to, so that if anything ever happens, that you have all of the credentials that you needed. Usually I recommend that you are undergoing an audit by either your insurance companies, and they're asking if you have a Bible that has all that information, so that, because when you start to ask IT companies for administrative credentials, the first thing they start to do is panic, thinking that you're going somewhere else. But whether you're happy or not happy with your IT support company, you should always have all of your administrative credentials, always. Always.
Is there anything in particular we're becoming coming out of COVID more mobile again? And I know that a lot of nonprofit staff uses their phone as opposed to a laptop for a lot of things. Is there anything security related specific to mobile devices that you want to point out?
So Lori asked if there's anything security specific to mobile devices that I'd want to point out. And I think there's at least 2 things that I'd want to point out. One, if if you're putting information that's protected information, or even your business's information that might not have to be protected by any kind of regulations, make sure there's a passcode on that device. Okay, most of these devices, whether it's an Android or an iPhone, they come encrypted, but if you don't have a passcode on that device and you lose your phone, which is common, and it happens all the time, then anyone that picks it up can open it up, open your email up, open your Dropbox account up, and start rifling through your information. So, if it's going to have business information on there, make sure that it times out and has a passcode. The second thing I want to point out, which is not really, addressing your question, is I recommend to everyone to stop allowing employees to use personal devices for business use. Now, I know that that's a hard thing for a lot of nonprofits because it involves money, and money might, that you might not have, but you should at least budget over time to start phasing out allowing personal devices to be used for business, because you can't control those devices. You can't assure that they're applying updates. If you terminate that employee or that employee quits, you can't do things like wipe that computer to make sure that they're not stealing information, or that they're not sending out an email blast from their Office 365 account. So I always recommend to every organization, whether it's a business that's for profit or non-profit, start phasing out the use of personal devices. Phones, everything. Yeah, the way I look at it now, we're a little bit different. We're for profit, but the way I look at it is, and I very first thing I do when I onboard a new employee, the first thing any employee at Clark Computer has to do is they have to sit across the desk from me, and I read all the security do's and don'ts. And one of the things I make clear to every employee is no system of ours is allowed ever to be on their personal device. And that gives me the ability to sleep at night knowing that I have full control over all of our information.
I think that would include volunteers.
Volunteers, anything, yeah. And I know it's hard, but it's becoming more affordable, especially with the introduction of Chromebooks. Chromebooks are a good alternative to Windows computers for a lot of cases. And they're becoming easier to use for business applications, especially as we move to the cloud. And if you can get a good Chromebook for a couple $100 versus $1,000 for a decent laptop. But yeah, I spend the money for those devices because I don't want to be compromised. And if I get compromised, if our business gets compromised, they get access to 500 plus businesses, and that would be a nightmare for me. A nightmare.
And another question that came in from the Zoom group: do you consider bank positive pay services an important component of strengthening the control environment in addressing cybersecurity risks?
Repeat that.
Do you consider bank, and then this is capitalized, positive pay services an important component of strengthening the control environment in addressing cybersecurity risks?
Is bank positive where that they're, I'm not really familiar. I got to say, I'm not really familiar with what bank positive pay is. So I'm going to have to plead ignorance. Yes, Lori's going to ask for more details on that. I'll try to answer it. And I've got Chuck, who does all my research for me. He can, if I can't answer it, he's going to do some research, and he's going to get you the answer for that. And I think you were going to ask a question.
Well, more specific to your company. I mean, you're located here in Frederick?
Yeah, Frederick County.
And you have 24-hour tech support, or at least
we
business
do.
hours?
Yeah, we do have business hours, but we have a on-call service where we have if for emergency use you can call us up. We have technicians that are on call.
So it's not just the two of you sitting in the.
No, we have just short of 20 employees. Most of them are technical. We're growing and we're getting ready to hire more employees. But I got to be honest, because I'm a workaholic, and I'm always carrying my phone. When we get after hours calls, the first person that our answering service calls is me. That's just how I am. And the second person that's called is I've got a person that helped build the business with me. His name's Lee James. He's been in the business as long as I am. He's the second person called. And if they can't get a hold of us, the third person called is my wife, who can always find me. And from there, we dispatch technicians. But I'm always for emergency calls, I want to know what's going on. So we're not so big that the owner can't get dirty every now and
I
then.
just always worry that, you go with a company, like a handful of employees,
Yeah.
turnover a lot.
Well, for IT support companies that help small businesses and nonprofits, it's uncommon for those companies to get past 5 employees. That's just the reality of it, is because we service clients that don't pay as much as large businesses.
Right.
So it's harder for IT support companies that focus on small organizations to grow. We've just kind of been very good at marketing and able to kind of transcend that.
How much of a security risk is there with internet-based apps that we all use now, like Zoom or Teams, or for communicating? I mean, is that a big concern, a little concern?
So I got a gentleman here asked is how big of a concern is I'm going to say cloud applications, but he asked internet-based applications. So that's another common thing I come across all the time, especially, with the older population, that they don't want to hear anything about the cloud, because it's not something they own. It's not something they feel that they secure. But as long as you're going with a cloud product that is security focused, and that, publish that they're meeting all the same requirements that you have to do by regulation, it's mainly safer to use that product than it is to house information on your own network. Not only is it safer, but, like if you use a product like Dropbox, who can be HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley compliant, or Office 365, you're pushing some of your liability onto them. Okay. And they have a much bigger staff that's concentrating on security than you're ever going to be able to afford. And a hacker can slip by most small businesses or small nonprofits to defenses a lot easier than they're going to slip past someone like Microsoft or Google or even Dropbox. So, most people think it's out on the cloud, internet accessible, and so it's less secured, but your network's internet accessible as well, and it's easier to hack into. A talented hacker can get past your defenses usually like that. Any other questions? That was easy. I was worried about
I do. I'm sorry.
Oh.
This is Maria. I have a question. And I apologize if you covered this. I had to take a quick phone call. What is your thoughts on Google Drives?
Google Drive, I have no problem with Google Drive. I mean, because Google puts a lot into security. I mean, the key there is two-factor authentication, and you want to make sure that you download their. They've got business associate agreements that you can download and file. That's the third-party agreement that I was talking about, that tells you that they're in compliance with all the regulations that you have to be in compliance with. So yeah, I'm a big fan. Now we don't use it at Clark Computer Services, but I use it for other reasons, outside of the business, and I feel very comfortable with it. Once again, as long as you're putting two-factor authentication in place. Oh, and I've got my director of compliance here, Chuck. Come on, he wants to add something, so I must have left something out.
It's not so much that you left it out, but talking about apps, the apps themselves typically aren't the big problem. The users are the problem. That's where the policies, procedures come in. That's where strong passwords come in. That's where making sure that the training comes in. You can use Google Drive. You can use a lot of different apps, Dropbox. You can use these, and they are secure in and of themselves. The weakness is not necessarily in those. The weakness is in the users. That's where we see most of our vulnerabilities. There are a lot of apps on cell phones, mobile phones, that are not really secure. I don't know if anybody keeps up with it, but Apple recently dropped a whole mess of applications from the ones that they support because they had vulnerabilities in them that weren't being addressed. Google is doing the same thing, or Androids are doing the same thing through the Google Store. They are dropping a lot of apps because there's a lot of vulnerabilities in those. The problem is that those vulnerabilities aren't just for those apps. They give hackers access, and when I say hackers, I mean their bots, access to be able to get into the phones, and then from there, access everything else that's on the phone. So it's a big problem, and one of the reasons why we don't recommend allowing personal devices, because you can't control what app goes on there. So you put an app on there that your kid likes to play, they're playing with it, all fine and dandy. Well, that app is not secure, lets an intrusion in. That intrusion then starts going through all of those apps and saying, oh, look here, I can get VPN access into this account. And then you're breached. So there are a lot of apps that don't have security on them, but the business apps do. And there's a lot of security that's there that, as long as you're utilizing it and your people are aware of the vulnerabilities, then you're going to be good.
Perfect.
Can I have a further explanation of the question?
Yep, you might have to stay up here.
It's a service where the checks a business is issuing are communicated to the bank, e.g. bank number and the amount, etc. And only those checks are recognized by the bank when they are processed for payment by the recipient. All other items hitting the checking account need to be separately reviewed by the company before being accepted for payment.
So what was the name that we called that again? I think
Positive pay. Basically, you're sending the bank a listing of all your checks.
yeah, so positive pay, it's a checks and balance, so that you send the bank the checks that you've written so that they can verify that that check.
That would be on the bank
Yeah, I
side.
would say that I would, I now understand, because I have one client that moved towards that, and they moved towards that. They're a big land developer in this area, and I'm not going to say the name, and it's not Osherman, so I want to spell that out. But it's another large developer that, has that someone had infiltrated their system and got their paper checks. And they do thousands of checks a month. And so whoever had, gotten those checks, they got away with about $200,000 through, forging checks. And they had the check numbers, they had, because they got all the definite copies of those checks. They were forging them, and they were able to get away with about $200,000. This company, I almost said the name. This company did move towards that. Now it just kind of ring the bell because I didn't associate the name towards that, so that they can ensure that in the future, any check that's cashed actually was a check that they issued. Yeah, so I'm in favor of that. I think that's probably hard for a lot of people to implement, but it is a good idea. Any other questions?
No, unless I missed something, I think we covered them all.
I don't think
I
you
have a
ever.
more specific one, but I can also meet with you afterwards. But for our organization, we recently migrated to Microsoft Teams, to 365
Yep.
and Teams. We're primarily a volunteer organization, so we have committees and we have volunteer instructors and tutors, and we've recently tried to determine how broad do we invite some of the volunteers into the teams and the channels as part of, I guess they're considered external users, because they don't have the direct Microsoft licenses that we have issued to our core staff members and some of our core volunteer teams. So I've been cautioned not to go too far beyond, don't have too many external users in the team structure. Yet that limits us in being able to actually support the committees with shared documents and folders and things like that. So I don't know, that's a very specific question, but.
I think if you do that, so yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that was a
So
long question.
this is an organization that primarily has more volunteers than you have full-time employees. Is that correct?
Right.
And they've moved towards Office 365, and I think you're specifically asking about Teams, for not only using it for video conferencing, but also sharing documents between volunteer committees.
Right.
Okay. And are you asking me if I say that that's okay, or are you asking how to?
To what extent is that and making our system vulnerable because we've got
Well,
external.
it does open up vulnerability. I would somehow firewall off what information. I think that's a hard question to answer, but yeah, I think what I would start recommending is limit what information that is shared via Teams to make sure that you're not sharing anything that is either sensitive for your business or that is protected under some regulation, whether it's HIPAA, CJIS, PCI, or some other regulation. I also would have a policy in place that all volunteers are trained on and have to sign for, that outlines what security controls that you expect them to have in place on any device that they're using to access this product. My director of compliance is shaking his head. So I think if you wanted to talk to us, we definitely could help you. You want to route it through John.
I'll add just briefly, I think, having external collaborators is a big part of Teams, and sort of sounds very necessary for what you're doing. But to dovetail to what Darren said, I would even go so far as to tag teams that have sensitive data in them and say, look, like there's like everybody, and train everybody. Hey, when you see this tag on a team, no external collaborators are allowed in this team. Allowed to see the data in this team, allowed to participate in the channels in this team, and then have teams that are accessible to external people and have everybody understand that you don't put sensitive data into those teams.
So what John, I don't know if everybody can hear, but John had just said that he would go even further to say that he would tag those, I guess, team groups that, may contain sensitive information and have a policy in place that no external members are allowed to be a part of that team that's tagged with sensitive information.
And just real quick to add on to that, you can have volunteers sign agreements that they are not going to divulge information.
Yeah.
So that is a thing that's very common. So
I think everybody probably here.
Sorry, I got a comment from Charles saying they can be invited as guests, correct? So Teams has a function of guests.
I would say that that's fine. Yeah, inviting external members as guests. Yeah, but I still would be, if you're going to operate volunteers, I would have a policy in place that has strict guidelines on, the security and controls that you expect them to put in place. And if you can afford the money that it takes to certify it, even go as far as having someone log onto their computer and make sure that they have antivirus installed and that the security definitions are up to date, that they have updates, automatic updates being applied to the computer and whatnot.
So if somebody here or listening today is interested in an IT assessment, should we contact On Mission IT?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, and yes.
Yeah, so there's two things.
So I got someone here asked, John's coming up here, but I'm gonna repeat in case people couldn't hear. If you're interested, he asked if you're interested in a security risk assessment, should you contact On Mission IT? And the answer to that is yes, and I'm gonna let John talk about that.
Yeah, sounds good. So, the next steps, how do we get the security risk assessment started? So, as I said earlier, we're going to send an email to everybody that participated in the seminar today. You can absolutely reply to that email and say, yeah, we're interested. We also have a website, onmissionit.org is our website. And in the contact us section, there's actually a drop down like, why are you contacting us? On that list, one of the options is security risk assessment. So you could contact us through that form, or you can reply to the email that I'm going to send out later. And of course, most people have Lori's email already. You can contact Lori and she can, put you in touch. Any of those methods would be just fine.
Do we have any other questions?
No, I think that's-
So that's